Welcome. Today's session on keen on architecture is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, by Frank Gehry, a Canadian-American architect who got the commission in 1991. Bilbao is in the Basque Country, northern part of Spain, and it's on the river Nervion, which runs through the city of Bilbao to the Cantabrian Sea. It's one of several museums belonging to the Guggenheim Foundation worldwide. So this piece of architectural history is, in the sense, part of the ongoing language of modern architecture. Frank Gehry is considered part of the late modern era, and he's kind of sometimes brought aside with a group of people called deconstructivists, although Frank personally believes himself not part of that, more of an artist who's creating architecture here that's very personalized to his ideas on form making. But nonetheless, it's been called the most important piece of architecture since 1980. The city itself was the hub for shipping activities for centuries. And what we'll see in the course of this sketch that it had a massive urban transformation that culminated in the opening of Bilbao in 1997. So a 6-year from design to build out. What we're looking at here in model form really quick is the language of it, which it seems from many of you know from the images you've seen online or in books, you'll find out it seems like it's an accretive series of sort of free-form shapes flying in space. Where in fact, the plans themselves, if you kind of look into the coding of the floor plan itself, there's a series of dedicated orthogonal space distributed over 19 galleries with classic orthogonal planning that can identify it from the exterior whenever you see stone on the outside. And so you can see some of those bars and shapes that come at the base of sort of this floral aspect in the central atrium. So in order to house collections of art, the curators prefer orthogonal, clean, clear space. On the outside, he adorns it with 9 other galleries, which have more of a swirling organic form, and then titanium cladding, which has this floral piece adjacent to it. And that's the aspect we're going to do near the entry here, which faces the river, so that we have an arrangement of the hard sort of early modernist prose of rote orthogonal volumes. And then what happens that really sort of sets Frank Gehry free, and then our final architect we'll look at, Zaha Hadid, is the impact of the digital age. So that what comes complete here is the 3D modeling that was done by Rick Smith, and the software he developed was paramount in developing the schemes of Gehry through the middle and latter part of his career, having virtual modeling as a catalyst to become known as the building information modeling 7 years later. And so now most architects on large scale projects do BIM, again, building information modeling, to show so much more information per pixel in terms of what's happening in terms of the structural integration of the language of the form and how the building is going to perform in the material itself. So it really sort of reshifted the direction of what architecture could possibly be once the digital design age impacted architecture proper. So we're going to move into our view here, seeing a little photograph on the right, to a point right about here, and then tilting up as we go closer, it rises away from us, and we'll see the flying canopy that comes over, and we'll articulate the trusses in our diagram. So the first thing we want to do is assign our base values to it. So we're going to mix sort of an array of green, blue with some black in it. We create some principal volumes down here and build out our composition and value. So the greens and the blues will pick up the sky tones as long as the colors of the rivers and float like sails above the artwork on the inside, which is a modern and contemporary art collection at this point, celebrating Catalonian and Spanish architects, artists, designers, as well as key pieces from the modern era from the late 40s on. So this will be a base wash that we'll use for a lot of the forms. So we want a lot of pigment in these pools here. We'll do a double batch here. And build that out and make sure there's plenty of water in the pool to start out. And again, we'll work with a light wash, a wet wash on the dry so we can control it. There's no reason to be too wholly precise here because the whole idea of this is that it's just like watching a river. It shifts in light and tone and value through the course of the day as the sun circumnavigates around it in the sky. So the building itself seems to have a life of its own over the scales of the titanium skin. And we'll make sure to pull some of the green of the water into there too. More of a blue-green at times. And we'll mix that in several washes so we don't have to be complete this time out. So we're going to make sure there's a lot of water in there now. There we go. And now we'll shift to the mid-range chisel brush. And we're going to work with some of the darkest areas first. So picking those out, we'll keep this one that seems to be parallel with our view shed, reflecting the light, and very, very bright. And so the contrary ones that are diving back behind it will curve back to the darkest here, leaving a little glimmer of light on that. We'll be aware of this is actually a reflection of this form in the distance. So that'll be deep and dark here. That edge is deep and then falling away to our left, away from the sun angles. The sun's coming from our above us and to the right. There'll be lesser tones out here to the left. So let's move from right to left here. And bring this nice dark pattern into this crevice here. And that little ribbon of light shining on that edge there on that peak. And then curl it around. So it drops down to some fenestration, which will come in later with something much darker. Now we'll push some of that dark tone further and further into where our water was originally, adding more value to this crevasse here. Do the same up top here. On the edge, it's going to fly away to the sun side, but then coming around here on this corner, you'll see that this little lip of the corner curls up and receives less light. So we're going to take water by itself and simply dissipate that down to page white on either side. And I'll come back to the value of the dark that we used before and use that at the break point of where the light strikes at the corner of our paper and let it go to white adjacent to the little lip that starts to curl towards us. And it becomes most brilliant when it ends up being perpendicular to the sun as it dives behind the front piece. So again, dark in this corner. That starts to bend that titanium, these skins, as sort of the scales of fish, the movement of clouds, the petals of a flower kind of float in space and keep reacting to the climate around it. Now to hold this edge and make it prominent in the sun, we have to go deep with tone to this corner before we get to the actual skin of glazing that opens up to the atrium. So we want to pull things in around our portal right into this corner. And then it tends to open up, being deeper in the center. As it curls away to the right, it picks up the sun and becomes a high point over here. So we're going to wash that out to page white. And as it wraps around to the other side, it's actually picking reflections of light off the roof of this canopy, which lights up this skin, which is turning away from us. So now we just use water to move that back to a lighter tone on this side and a lighter tone on that side. So it goes page white again. This is sort of a flapping piece up here, which is undulating. So it finds its sort of shade side along the edge here where the rest faces the sun. And then curls down and reflects white and becomes darker again as it flips up behind this edge. And in the backdrop, another fairly dark piece against our sunlit titanium. Now we can come into the skin of our entry as we move from right to left here. And what this shows here in the photograph is sort of breakpoints of the glazing, not giving a nice straight curve edge to it, but kind of a sharpened edge of points is how it's reflecting the mass next to it. So we're going to drive a very dark reflection up against this edge, this white bright edge, but the top it's going to splay out along the panels of glazing. And that's again sort of a abstract effect of how nature and architecture are having interplay together. So we also see then on the very lip of this, the other three-dimensional face of this block that comes down towards our railing. So we'll first come in and do the whole area dark, and then we'll come in and detail that edge even darker to show the change of planes there. We'll come right up to the edge of the back side of that piece and just show these little sort of pointed struts. Again, it looks like a cachot, but it's actually a reflection of glass of the dark face that's around the corner from us. And then pull that down here. And now light strikes this part of the walkway from the front plaza towards the front door. And now we'll push this on this side by coming over to the front lip of the canopy. We give that sort of a monolithic tone to start now. And we'll take that same tone and kind of wash out the backdrop for it. So this is part of the building that's much further away to us, but it's in the shade side. So we'll simply give it a neutral tone for now. Come back and detail more shade and shadow within it, and then keep it darker next to our concrete column that's coming up and supporting the flying canopy up above here, which is very brilliant there facing the sun. It'll be brilliant the whole face of this until it comes down to where it's have the shadow thrown on it from this element. So the light's coming down and casting a shadow onto this. And so it's not going to be a straight line across because this is rotund in form. So it's going to be more of a parabolic arc of light coming down and then edging right to this point. So from there down, we can use our same wash to start things out. Carry the lower part of the shaft, which is all in shade now, right down to the plaza. And then using the fine point from just on the left side of that rotunda, which isn't receiving light, and take that down to that arc that we just painted in. And that should help build that out as a round element. Right. This ends up being receiving light here. These two planes don't. So we'll come back to this area. And simply paint out the initial tone for those two zones. And this will be an egress panel here, which will be much darker by the time we're finished. So we'll give that a base coat for now. Now, as the skins of the walls of the atrium, this is also glazing back here, rise up, they open up down here and show a return of this wall coming back. So that's an even darker area. So we'll hit it with the base tone first, but we'll leave the skin next to it a little bit brighter for now. So that's a placeholder to go darker here because we need to push more and more value to have this whole form pop off the paper and undulate more and more. I'll go into a little bit of detailing up here to hold the truss, which is supporting this projected canopy up here. So right now it's drawn as a line element. What we want to do is make sure we're going to hold that with the space of some depth to it. So draw another line parallel to this so we've got a nice white form at the base that we're going to leave white and do color adjacent to it. So what we leave will be the structure. And then thicken up all the struts in the truss proper. So it's got the vertical elements which connect the two parts of the truss together, and the diagonals which deal with the tension moving between them. So the structure in a truss is typically always held in the diagonals, letting it act in tension and compression all at the same time. So we want to leave all these struts white and the front skin white for now. And that way this will float in space as the light hits the sunlight there. The ones in the back are all dark, so we can simply wash that out. But right now we want to work with our fine point and develop some tone and value again, since our light pool is kind of running dry with pigment here. There we go. And now work in that system in between. Leaving little areas white. And that's the most important truss because you'll see the other three that are identical to it, but they're in shade. So we don't need to show the brilliance of the page white for those. So everything else behind it now, we can come back in with our broader brush and give that an initial cloak of value for the underside. And it's a white surface, so it's going to get some reflected light on it. So it won't be a very dark tone eventually, but we will highlight other aspects along the way. Push that out. And at the top of our column, that'll be cast in shade 2. And to there. Really quickly, the underside of this steel projection will be in shade as well. Hey, now as the grid of these panels, and they're really sort of raked all vertically, tall, thin members. So if we simply came back in to where this meets, we can then, let's see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we can simply bisect that. Pitch that back. raise up by that direction. And on this side, since they're on a diagonal and rotated around, it's the same width of glass, but it's going to be a little bit thinner in this direction. And that wall cants back towards the interior atrium. And we'll pick it up on the other side here, did our wash. There you go. And then this shape, this triangulated form or pyramidal, rotates around and has its 90-degree skin fall back into the space in this darker area. So now you have two sheets of glass which are folded into the floating sails or petals of the flower up above. And so right now we've got sort of our base indication of all these values established. Now it's a matter of doing the sketch again and keep highlighting more and more value as we kind of move through it. So I'll shift this up here so you can address this lower right area. We're going to go into the dark value. And now there is glazing between this flowing form in front of us and these dark panels over here. And that just gets washed out to the edge. And so there's our sort of base sketch of trying to articulate the range of values here. And now it's a matter of really taking our time and trying to create further and further development of the pattern language of these forms kind of glistening in the sun as the sun rotates across the axes. So we'll again kind of work with our standard range of what the titanium looks like. If you looked at it in your hand, it'd be sort of a it could value how the color of the sun is. It could look gold sometimes, or it could look green or blue or just gray on a gray day. It's got a whole range of animation to it. So we'll stick with that blue, green, black to develop now another wash pool that's going to go deeper in value. So it'll be more pigment in proportion to the amount of water we're using. And then in your plunge, you might want to leave, if you mix a couple up at once, one that might be a tad more green, one more blue, and one more black. So you could have commingle those in. So in your wash, you can see as the water settles, it might pick up more of the green hue and the green tint along the way. We'll do this with the fine point brush to start some of the zones where we want to push this towards the range of 0 to 100% value. So let's go left to right on this now. And take the edge of this right by its corner and push it against the sky beyond it. And that's fairly the same monolithic tone across. A flat plane that's undulating. And on the back side over here, we have a nice movement of reflection and shadows cast, which comes down angularly towards this edge and then pitches back out to touch and triangulate under this piece which floats above it. And we can come down to further definition of the glazing where it's reflecting the dark underneath it. So it pulls out the light of the sky, but then it's reflecting this canopy on an angle here and then flips over when it reaches this plane. And since this is more dominant, it faces more directly to the sun, and this is canting away from it, this whole zone back here will receive a darker tone. So now we're layering washes and getting deeper into the space underneath that piece. We could highlight the center section of this as it rotates from left to right and show the middle being and darker. And then as it pushes itself towards the edge of this, that zone becomes darker and darker. So we wash that darker value right to this corner. The underside. And then fan it out with just water towards the edges. And then your little brush strokes that move horizontally across that will start to read as the pattern of the actual pieces that are sort of stitched together on the skin of that very thin plated titanium. And titanium is used because it's a cleaner product than the skin of copper, for instance, in other buildings for the environment. And this is all cloaking about 350,000 square foot site on this river with about 11,000 square yards of exhibition space distributed over the 19 galleries. So, and there is a little subtle change on the front here. That's why these lines are drawn in here, where even this plane up here isn't singular. It starts out and folds into two and then splits and has sort of a spine to it, which comes down and gives it more structural rigidity where it creates a form here. So you want to break the value with probably your biggest brush with a light wash just to differentiate those skins. So with a lot of water, a little bit of pigment, we're going to come right to the edge of that and just sort of lift that away so we see that definition there. When they both come up here, they're very white, so become very, very white. So they dissipate out. And here they come down just to the water itself. So in this particular piece of architecture, we're actually getting closer to trying to emulate nature more than the patterns of architecture. Okay, back to our dark pools, we work our way across. This corner edge up here, be nice to go deeper against the sky. A bit more pigment in there. And then draw down. Maybe right at this tip. Push some value right where it curls back away from the sun. And then wash it back in. The same tip over here. Find those edges. And right up here against the sky, just to edge it so that we know it's not a white building. So right where it meets the sky, where it's going to be brightest, you want to make sure there's a tone there. Same is true for this edge coming down. And then it'll wrap up right where it gets that burst of sun right at the edge of the paper stock there. And we'll come and treat that edge a little bit stronger. And then as this plane on the right pushes back and curves back into the building, we see another array of the same type of glass sheathing we see in the front here. It's going to dive back in and become pretty strong dark towards this crevice. We'll keep pushing that back in there. And then wash it out to the right. And then we'll push some very deep values. So bring some black and blue and some of the green to make it much more pigment based and less about the water. Down over on the far right here. So we'll have that go right where the fenestration is and drop down. And now we'll loop around back to the left and we'll understand that this, oops, understand a little bit. We'll understand that this little edge of this now is going to become a darker tone in the glazing next to it. So this is the left side of this form that comes down and meets the glazing. So you have to differentiate that from what we're doing glazing wide, and that runs beneath our walkway, so we can take it right to the base of the paper. Then again, that'll help that pull that form off the paper there. And now we'll come back into some of our glazing area on this side and realize that this is in a crevasse, so it's going to be, the glass is reflecting the very dark aspect between the forms here. And then against the brilliant stone out front, it'll have a nice contrast. Using the Dassault Systems, the CATIA V3 software, it had this remarkable ability to stay on time and budget because the computer visualizations were employed could actually articulate specific costs. So detailed costs and realistic estimates were done before they even proceeded with the project. So they could stay on budget and on time, which is really amazing for the complexity of a building like this. So now we'll bring some of the value around here, make it a little bit stronger on the inside edge of this piece where it meets the other glass skin. We'll keep the skin a little bit brighter. And then we'll simply float that over and have it go to white as it makes the corner, because we want it to be bright as we make the turn over here. So just water at the edge. And when that sets, we'll come back in and turn that corner a little bit stronger. So now some of the detail here is a little more pronounced because we've got the thickness of the white truss left. Right now, these are lined out. We want to develop the thickness of those trusses a little bit as well. So what we'll do is come back in and simply go to their elements and draft over a pencil line to show some depth, and that'll stop our wash from bleeding too high away from the truss. So for the top chord, we'll put those in, and then for the bottom chord as well. So now this will be with your fine tip brush. Just less about water and more about just sort of painting as if your brush becomes more of a pencil now. And we're going to just lightly put in the sense of the thickness of that truss from the black line up and from the black line down. And again, by pressing down when you drafted the line in there in pencil, it crushes the paper's fibers together so they don't move the water through it. It gives a little more definition of thickness. They're all going to be in shadow back there, so we don't see a lot of the detail. And make it simply just without even drafting a line in, again with the fine point brush, fine out a little bit, and just bring down some strokes for some of the vertical members to connect those up. And again, it's just kind of a sketch of that idea, so it gives some authenticity to the integral structure there. More of a suggestive idea than actually trying to render that out. So now we're about 50% the way through. We've articulated all of our zones that are key to us. So our next stop is simply to revisit everything we've done and keep highlighting and pulling out more definition of light playing on the building. So come back in. Again, if you mix all three again, with probably the major being the blue and black and a little bit of a deeper blue-green inside that. We'll get this array of choices now to proceed and push more value into smaller areas. So we've got our white, we've got our neutrals, our 30-40% grays, our 50%, and now we're pushing towards 60 to 90. So let's go again, follow around because it probably sets up in our sort of clockwise pattern here. Come to this corner. Again, with your third wash in this area, make it tighter at this edge. And this time I'll let it kind of gradate away from being darkest at the bottom. And now I'll come back to being strongest at the underside, about to face the white of the ceiling. And then from there, just wash that out a little bit so it blends with the original wash. So it's monolithic. And then we'll come with our deep crevasse in here where this plane's coming down in a three-dimensional axis. This is a two-dimensional plane, so they're colliding here. So they'll make an abrupt line at this point where it stops and becomes glazing. So we want to come up that edge here around our canopy, which is lit as it flies free in the air above the skin below, and take it strong right to this corner, because this is a nice collision of the whole complex coming together right in the center of things. And it gets deeper and bolder and then washes up towards the top, and it really doesn't wash all the way to this edge here. It kind of fans out, but it does keep trailing up along the skin of the titanium toward the center part of this moving arc. So we're going to draw that pigment up here, right around the other side of this, and have a trail right in the middle. If you just horizontal strokes, it'll kind of help out looking like the actual titanium in space once we come back in and do a little line work right when the sketch is dry at the end. So go ahead and pattern that out like that. You could probably add a little water to blur out the edges if the strokes are too bold. Our tip seems to be strong enough here. This one could be a little bit bolder with its backdrop as it curls towards us away from the light. A little bit of value there. This plane right now looks like it's reading too much as the same plane, so we're going to drop it behind the front here by going darker right at the lip. And then it curls and catches sunlight fairly quickly, so we're going to drop it off right about there. And then let that trail up the skin in the center just like we did over here. There we go. Now we're going to push a lot of dark value around the lip of this frontal piece and then drive it towards this edge here, because it becomes a little bit lighter here as it hits this point and then turns 90 degrees before it's covered by this flap. So we're going to put our darkest aspect right on this rim here. That'll trail up the side of this skin, kind of dissipate into that white. And it comes right to this edge here, then it's being brighter than our glazing down below. So we can have that kind of trail off this way. It's actually got sort of a little bit where the titanium actually reflects just like glazing does. It's shiny enough. It's picking up the shade side of this volume. And that skin there. And now wrapping around here, we've got one last dark over on the right side here with the fenestration down below. And so we'll simply put in the sheets of glass now by saying it's darker than the mullions themselves. So do a pane, do another pane, and leave some of the other blue as a brighter blue so it almost looks like framework for glazing. That's 3 deep. That gives a little texture of the smaller scale aspects to it. Then we'll come back as roll over here and highlight this as being bolder. And it's going to contrast more when it reaches this fine point up top and then kind of dissipate away toward the bottom. And now we'll probably strengthen up these reflections of it over on this side. And we can leave a little bit of white between them, just like we did at the other windows to show the bracketing. And this bottom plane then not being glazing is the stonework. And that's just receiving a simple wash down to the base of the paper. Wrap it in. We're going to drive some more tone into the crevice over here where this wraparound glazing goes from the plaza deep into the atrium. And over on this side, we haven't done much value to it yet, but there actually is a recess in this panel. I imagine this is probably an egress door for the glazing. So it's on an angle, but it moves in towards a doorway threshold. And then we'll highlight the underside of this panel once again. And now to the underside of the canopy, it is white, but it's going to have a dark edge to it. Because it's perpendicular to the sun down here. It'll also wash up diagonally. You get a nice contrast for the column, which is all white to read better. Maybe we'll highlight the edge of it once again. Want that left side rolling away from us. And maybe we'll strengthen this whole cast shadow on the column. From right to left along that arc. This little pool popping up in there. Push it away, and now we'll take that down because the top of that panel of glaze is receiving so much less light than the rest. We'll just wash those together. And there's a little bit of a cast shadow on the tops of these white trusses, the element here, and a little tiny shadow from this piece casting onto the projected canopy. We can treat that with a deeper tone in the light of it. We're getting close. We've got a couple minutes left to come back in and push now the value all the way to 80, 90, and probably back away from being ink black and at 100%. So if you can get to 80, 90%, that's a great contrast for it. And we'll let it set for a second, and we'll put a little articulation of some of the line work in so you get a little bit of texture on top of the tones and values. So now with the pools of water you have left, there's no need to add water to it because they're going to become tight and dark with value now. So just add pigment to those pools. And never go jet black. They always mix black with other colors or Payne's gray because black isn't really, it should be treated as a color by itself. Always try to build a black through using other colors together. Okay, that'll be nice and blue there. All right, so now we're looking at the points, which are, if you squint out your sketch, you squint at the sketch here, you're looking for those absolute dark areas. We want to find those before we finish our washes here. So I see those as at the base here, kind of going clockwise again, that dark triangle here, the open to the door, in the crevices and where planes meet themselves, edges against the sky, little lips and rims, so we make sure that pulls off the sky. We're not going to wash in the blue, the value here. We're going to leave that kind of page white. The tips and the corners, again, the crevasse between those, the reflection here, don't treat it the same along the whole way, make it strongest right where it meets the architecture and the deep aspect, because obviously the deepest darks you'll have in any architecture is always going to be the fenestration. So around we go in that movement. We'll start over here on the edge one last time, or the tip of this. And then probably take that all the way to this edge. And it can be a little bit brighter in the center of it. And then wash it out if you want to make it more monolithic. And push some of that value along this back side of the sky so it really floats out against the past there. And now pushing that value deep into this pocket here against the glazing, which still a little bit water left in my wash from before. It'll take the median of the corners and towards where the water stopped. And I'm going to push that value a bit down here as well, as it shows the reflection of the glazing showing the underside of the canopy. It kind of comes down at an angle and meet this one in the front. And with more of a dry brush, I think I'll do a little bit of that patterning of panes of glass that run across here, just to give a little bit of texture to it while it's in its shaded area that will project down, as if that will happen down here as well. We don't have to really do that there. More to the tip, articulate that edge a little bit more. On this side a bit more. Down to this little ravine of space. And now pushing some of that nice blue black into our glass panels over here. And now coming around to our bottom to kind of wrap up the washes, we'll come to this edge. All right, strongest right at the top. Edge it to the fenestration. And then stop where the walkway comes in and meets it. Right there. And around we'll come to our base triangle. And maybe one more little push on the edge of the column. I think with the black lines, you could highlight those more for space if you like, make it a little thicker. But what we're going to try here for the first time is bring some just graphite back into this, because there is little subtle line work that comes across here. And we're not going to do it everywhere. We're just going to do suggestive areas so people get a sense that it's a skin of very small pieces all brought together, and the titanium materials out there, the plates, they're all hung over the galvanized steel structure. There are about 33,000 of these plates that cover the skin of the building. Architecture, well, let's set up here to do a couple of quotes from some critics at the time. Paul Goldberger from the New Yorker thought that this was one of the rare moments when critics, academics, and the general public were all completely united about something. Usually there's always some detractors, some people that don't buy into it, but this was a confluence of great ideas. The randomness of the curves were designed to catch the light, is from Gary's point of view, and he nicknamed it the flower because of its shape that serves sort of an organizing center of the museum. So that with all the different aspects of what the curator needed, the types of collections the Guggenheim had, it kind of forces this natural feature out into the site and kind of claims the river edge for the city of Bilbao. So we could do really quickly, if we look at the image again, you see the horizontal element is kind of dominant on the skin going left to right, and then wrap it around on the side here. We don't need to draw it everywhere. We just want to start it at some points, just sort of lightly, just to show some linear aspects that march down the skin of the building. Obviously, they're very difficult to paint those lines in, so just coming back, give us a third media here can help that out. And then just sort of dissipate it for a while and stop, and then maybe pick it up a little lower when it comes closer towards us. As it comes closer, the spacing between them would be broader and broader. Make it stronger right where it meets the strength of its edge. And that gives some kind of tactile idea toward it, and come back in and show maybe a little bit of the movement with the pieces themselves by showing the vertical struts that organize those pieces along those skin. So again, at the top, at the corner, at the edge. This is so far away, it's almost not even noticeable. But this one in the front might be interesting to put those pieces in that actually create the cascade of those windows coming down. They're much taller than they are wide. And make their way down the grade here. And then same thing over here. We see a little bit of that movement from the diagonal, this access panel here, and then again, some of that horizontal aspect. Just gives a little more architectonic detail to the finishing touches of your sketch here. And maybe up here on the bright side, you can show those pieces sort of moving on that curvilinear aspect of it too. When it comes to the tip here, I'll rotate over and we'll see it. This is parallel here. This is a bit perpendicular to it, so it's going to vanish to a different point. So arc those down a bit. And it may give a little more of a gesture of the materiality of the form by doing that. So there you have a masterpiece of late 20th century architecture that really was the crowning point of that incredible movement of the modern masters moving through the 20th century. Frank Gehry and Zaha Hadid are not part of that original team of four modern masters, but certainly are part of the import of contemporary late modern architecture.